We are not a party to the conflict, and therefore France will never take part in operations to reopen or liberate the Strait of Hormuz in the current context.
12 seconds later.
A new joint statement from Japan and other allies signaling they are ready to help secure the shipping now through the Strait of Hormuz and support efforts to stabilize global energy supplies. Now, that's counter to what some of them have previously said.
Well, I hate to say I told you so, but this is exactly what we predicted was going to happen. As a matter of fact, we're going to proudly give ourselves a pat on the back for this one, because it now appears that America's allies in Europe and Asia are finally signaling an openness to helping out with the Strait of Hormuz as Trump had requested. Of course, this comes after a week of non-stop hype and panic about how, the NATO countries told Trump no, he's so owned, he's humiliated, America's allies are abandoning her, to which I said, that was never how this was going to end. First and foremost, I'm not sure if you've watched Trump conduct diplomacy for 6 years now, but this is always how it goes. Trump starts off making a big threat. Another country immediately says no, they act super defiant, but what happens in the end? They ultimately cave and come to the table. We've seen that story play out before. I'm not sure why people thought this one was going to be different, but it turns out that's not the case. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the biggest reason I argued why, in the end, these countries will eventually come and help out with the Strait of Hormuz, has nothing to do with how much they like Trump or the effectiveness of American diplomacy, but those countries' own self-interest, which is to say, you're talking about our allies here whose economies rely way more on energy flowing through the Strait of Hormuz than America does. And so it doesn't matter at the end of the day how much these individual world leaders particularly hate Donald Trump. They simply cannot afford to let the Strait of Hormuz be insecure. And so if it comes to the point where the US is absolutely serious, we're not very keen on doing it ourselves, even though we can, then what do you think the natural response here is going to be? That's why I predicted days ago that I thought the people who were getting too freaked out about this supposed NATO rejection of Trump were incredibly stupid. As a matter of fact, let us briefly play what I told you a couple days ago, because again, this is exactly what we said was going to happen. Now, what I would argue is that when you read between the lines, the media is wrong about this. That's not actually what's happening. Rather, what's going on is the typical fence-sitting and reluctance that you so often see from the UK and many of our European allies. And this whole thing has been happening for 6 years straight now. And my prediction in the end is that these countries, because of the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is ultimately too important to their own economy and their own security, will give in to Trump, not because they want to, but because they physically have to. Their own economies cannot survive. So, some people might try to say the opposite. I would argue these countries are essentially right now just leeching off America, hoping America does the job for them. And if Trump continues to double down and show that, hey, we're 100% serious. We expect you to also do your fair share, especially looking at you, NATO countries, to also protect the Middle East. I think that's going to happen. Yeah, well, what has happened since then? We'll tell you about that in today's video. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work. It also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let us begin here by explaining the chronology of how Trump continued to put on the pressure and once again send that message to NATO and other aligned countries that, hey, this has never been about America needing your help with the Strait of Hormuz. Rather, it's a gesture. If you prove to America in this moment that you are such an unreliable ally, you will not even take defensive steps to protect, hey, your own energy markets from what's happening right now, then we are going to remember that. And again, how those countries are responding to that. So let us start here by bringing you what Trump said here on just March 18th, saying that, I wonder what would happen if we finished off what's left of the Iranian terror state and let the countries that use it, we don't, be responsible for the so-called Strait. Which is to say, once again, Trump is repeating here, the Strait of Hormuz certainly affects American energy prices in the sense that it is related, obviously, to global supply and demand. But less than 5% of our energy even comes through that part of the world. You know who's heavily reliant, however, on Middle Eastern energy? Places like Europe and Asia. So once again, he's reiterating here, if you're not going to come secure your own energy resources, America's not giving you a guarantee we're going to do that for you. Because as Trump has made the point to NATO and other alliances for years, no more freeloading, right? This is supposed to be a mutual defense relationship. We're not asking you to go bomb Iran with us. We're simply saying, hey, you want to secure the global economy for yourself? How about do that? How about don't just leech off America even when it comes to, your own energy and stuff like that? Well, this is what he said. And further stating that would get some of our non-responsive allies in gear and fast. Well, certainly it would, because I repeat, they're just leeching off America. They know they need the Strait of Hormuz. They were basically just hoping that America would do it for them. And when he met just a few days ago with the Irish Prime Minister in the White House, Trump reiterated a lot of that message to Europe, further making other points about, hey, we're helping you out with Ukraine, many other things. You won't help us out. You're going to regret that.
I mean, the only thing, and I agree with everything you said, but we helped with Ukraine.
Yes.
And they don't help with Iran. All of their military is there, but you can always have somebody drop a mine in the water. It's like terrorism.
Yep.
And then you have the people that own the billion-dollar ship saying, well, let's not move that ship yet because we want. So we thought that Europe would help that because they do have some minesweepers. But it's amazing that, they all said, what a great job. They were calling me, congratulating us on the great job we did with respect to Iran, and we knocked the hell out of them. They're no longer the bully of the Middle East. They were known as the bully of the Middle East, and they're not the bully anymore. But you would have thought they would have said, we'd love to send a couple of minesweepers. It's not a big deal. It doesn't cost very much money. But they didn't do that. So, I think it's very unfair to the United States, not to me, but to the United States.
And already throughout the week, we began to see some of those attitudes start to change in Europe. As one example, the EU VP apparently told the Iranian foreign minister just a couple of days ago that safe shipping would be Europe's red line. In other words, if you don't secure the shipping routes that are vital for our own economy, if you keep on messing with them, then in some way, shape, or form, Europe's going to have to get involved. To which I say, okay, great. Thank you for that. I agree. Safe shipping should be your red line if you're the European Union. Then why don't you come and do something about it? Why don't you come help us out in securing safe shipping if it really is your red line? It seems sort of antithetical on one hand to say we care about safe shipping, but then publicly tell Trump no when he wants to ask you for help in the Strait of Hormuz. Although we'll get to that in a second, because I repeat, for the reasons we listed, you are watching the mindset here begin to change, because at the end of the day, Europe's own economies are more important to it than whatever Trump derangement syndrome stand that they want to make here. So you have that on one hand. You had smaller European countries like Estonia maybe bucking the bigger ones, stating publicly they were ready to help the U.S. when it comes to Iran. Now, I'm not sure what Estonia really has the power to do, but we do appreciate that, and it does seem to show these dividing of attitudes in Europe, where some of the countries seem to think that Trump has a point here. And of course, perhaps the most significant statement came out of the NATO secretary here, who basically, as we saw during the whole Greenland situation, sort of the mediator between Trump and Europe, and admitted, yes, the Strait of Hormuz is very important, and basically he was talking on Trump's behalf to try to get these European countries to get serious and get their act together. Take a listen.
Of the ballistic missiles, of the nuclear capability is severely degraded. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, I've been in contact with many allies. We all agree, of course, that Strait has to open up again. And what I know is that allies are working together, discussing how to do that. What is the best way to do it? They're working on that collectively to find a way forward.
So yeah, I think you could certainly see where this is beginning to go. It got so bad for Europe that even Trump-deranged neocon and nowadays Democrat activist John Bolton, of all people, came out and admitted that the European leaders were making a mistake by telling Trump no, largely because it would give the US an excuse to stop helping Europe when it came to Ukraine, which, as Trump argued, was 100% valid and accurate. So, in other words, the NATO countries, which, the sort of foreign policy establishment has spent many years arguing Trump is mistreating Europe, that's so mean, shared alliance, shared values, why is he doing this? Even those types of characters had to come out and admit right now Europe was making a severe strategic mistake, even coming from characters like John Bolton.
But I will say I think the Europeans make a mistake by responding to that kind of juvenile behavior with juvenile behavior of their own. A number of European leaders, including Kaja Kallas, the European Union's chief foreign policy official, have said expressly, Iran is not our war. That's a very dangerous way to put it, because it invites Donald Trump. It almost teases him to come back and say, well, okay, Iran is not your war. Ukraine is not our war. It's very dangerous to approach Trump in the same way he behaves.
Well, when you put it like that, absolutely. In this case, for once, we can truly say John Bolton is correct about something, because factually speaking, yes, Europe is absolutely inviting that possibility. And we all know Putin does not fear the European Union. The EU has no capacity to defend Ukraine on their own, no matter how much they claim to care about it, while they're, of course, still relying on Russian energy in a pretty hypocritical way, and so on and so forth, which is exactly why we just got the announcement hours ago that perhaps this no to Trump attitude is not lasting so long. As you can see, Germany, UK, France, Italy, Netherlands, and Japan. So this is mostly the big power players of the EU. But on top of that, Japan also joining us. It's worth noting that right now in the White House, the Japanese Prime Minister is meeting with President Trump. And oh, by the way, Japan is a country heavily reliant on the importing of Middle Eastern energy. They may have been hit the hardest by the current gas crisis of almost every country, any country on earth. So that's important to point out too. So, this U.S. alliance pact is issuing a joint statement, now finally condemning Iran and expressing their, quote, readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Oh. But I was told that wasn't going to happen. I was told they said no, they rejected us. Oh. Turns out we predicted this correctly. And I repeat, it's not because they love Trump or something. It's because these countries understand their economies need the Strait of Hormuz way more than America. Trump is correct about that. And so if push comes to shove, if America makes any semi-serious effort to say, okay, well, that's going to be your problem, they have no choice but to rush and figure out how to help us out in the Strait of Hormuz. So, a lot of the freeloading allies of ours basically found out they're no longer able to freeload. That's all that happened. So, here's the full statement, though. Quote, we condemn in the strongest terms recent attacks by Iran on unarmed commercial vessels in the Gulf, attacks on civilian infrastructure, including oil and gas installations, and the de facto closure by the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian forces. We express our deep concern about the escalating conflict. How many times have they said that? I know. We call on Iran to cease immediately its threats, laying of mines, drone and missile attacks, and other attempts to block the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping, and to comply with UN Security Council Resolution 2817. Freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle of international law, including under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The effect of Iran's actions will be felt by people in all parts of the world, especially the most vulnerable. By the way, that includes you guys, right? Your countries. So finally, they're realizing, hey, we have to do something about this because it affects our country. Common sense. These people, I repeat, seriously thought the Trump derangement syndrome of Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron was going to somehow override the very real need for their economies to secure the Strait of Hormuz. It was stupid from the beginning. I knew this was going to happen. I'm like, this is probably the least surprising thing that's happened all week, right? But consistent with UN Resolution 2817, we emphasize that such interference with international shipping and the disruption of global energy supply chains constitute a threat to international peace and security. In this regard, we call for an immediate comprehensive moratorium on attacks on civilian infrastructure, including oil and gas installations, which Trump likewise has called for as well. We express our readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the Strait. We welcome the commitment of nations who are engaging in preparatory planning. We welcome the International Energy Agency decision to authorize a coordinated release of strategic petroleum reserves. We will take other steps to stabilize energy markets, including working with certain producing nations to increase output. Yes, because oil prices matter to everybody. We will also work to provide support to the most affected nations. Maritime security and freedom of navigation benefit all countries. We told you that. We told you that. It's true. We call on all states to respect international law and uphold the fundamental principles of international prosperity and security. And this, again, is a joint statement coming from UK, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan on the Strait of Hormuz. And ladies and gentlemen, as much as I'd like to say, oh, Trump did it, he's amazing at this, I think it has much more to do with a picture like this right here. You look at oil prices around the world right now, you notice these lines are starting to diverge, which is to say 3 distinct oil markets are beginning to come out, right? First of all, you have the Asian oil market, which is Oman oil right here. You can see in the blue, sky high, right? Their oil over there is getting as high as $167 a barrel, which is to say, as much as Japan is sometimes a useful ally, and, I do like the Japanese prime minister, I love Japan as a country, I don't think their decision to finally express their involvement in the Strait of Hormuz has much to do with liking Trump or liking America. It's the fact right now, their oil is at $167. Yes, they have a severe need to get involved.
But even against that backdrop, I firmly believe that it is only you, Donald, who can achieve peace across the world. And to do so, I am ready to reach out to many of the partners in the international community to achieve our objective together.
Japan to step up because, we have that kind of relationship. And we step up for Japan. We have 45,000 soldiers in Japan. We spend a lot of money on Japan. And we've had that kind of a relationship. So I'm not surprised that they would step up. We don't need much. We don't need anything. Honestly, we don't need anything from Japan or from anyone else, but I think it's appropriate that people step up. In the case of Japan, I hear they get more than 90% of their oil through the Strait. So that's a big reason to step up.
Right, they have to do something. If America's calling, America's saying we're not willing to just do it ourselves, Trump threatened, we may just leave the Strait of Hormuz to its own devices for these countries. Obviously, they're going to have to issue some statement of getting involved there. You look at Brent oil, which is, in other words, European oil, as you can see right here. Not nearly what Asia is dealing with because they have other sources, but still higher than America's $113 per barrel. And then at US right now, still below 100. They're currently sitting at $97 a barrel. So again, you wonder why countries in Asia and Europe suddenly said, we're going to come help with the Strait of Hormuz. That's the reason why, I repeat, that's the very reason I predicted from the beginning they would, quote unquote, cave to Trump in the end. It doesn't stop there, though. Last night, we talked about the whole natural gas situation. It's now being reported that about 17% of Qatar's natural gas export capacity was wiped out by Iran. So they still have, obviously, the other 83%, but that is a significant hit. This is something that could take many years to repair. Well, this is very interesting. So we repeat there, right? Qatar lost a lot of LNG. Who buys the most Qatari liquefied natural gas? That has been wiped out last night. You can clearly see it's not America, right? We're way down here, basically very close to zero of our natural gas comes from Qatar. But who does buy a bunch? Number one buyer of Qatari natural gas, ladies and gentlemen, is China, right? So, we've talked about that, how what's going on right now is actually kind of a checkmate for them. But you see China, India, Taiwan, Pakistan, South Korea. But who's now down here, right? Italy, one of the NATO countries, they're basically top 10 here. One of the countries that buys a lot of energy from Qatar. Now they're invested in getting involved here. Yeah, obviously Italy. Then who's down here, right? Japan, you notice that? Okay. So, other countries, obviously, in Europe that rely on Qatari liquefied natural gas. And this is just out of Qatar. Keep in mind the supply and demand effects it's going to have in other markets in the Middle East that also export liquefied natural gas. This is all to say, right? Once again, this is America basically stating to our allies, look, We don't rely barely on any of the liquefied natural gas right now that we are fighting to protect. You do, so you better come do something about that. You better come help out, right? Not that we need your help, but hey, why should our resources be bogged down protecting you when you could protect yourself? That's been the argument by Trump for years. Once again, you're seeing that be made, and you're seeing it be highly, highly effective for these very reasons. So that said, guys, there you essentially have it. We told you this was going to happen, but that said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.